My name is Rabia, and this is my truth. First, I was a child. Then, I became a woman. Now and forever, I am a goddess. We are here today. It is the culmination of my life's purpose. Everything that I've experienced, every high, every low, every lesson has brought me to this day. And this is the day that I intend to speak everything that I've experienced so that I can finally step into my power and I can finally step into the full potential of the goddess that I am. And hopefully by shining my light, I can help other people awaken to their own. I'm terrified. There are a lot of secrets in my story. I've worn a lot of masks. I've lived in worlds where I was a complete misfit, and by expressing my truth, I was going to expose things and expose people. But what I realize now is that by holding these truths in, that I'm only minimizing my power and what I'm meant to do in this world. And I can't do that anymore. I've compromised so much for so many years. Muhammad Usman Khan, he was born in 1941 in Hyderabad, India. He grew up in a mud hut in India, no running water, no electricity. He studied under street lights, tying rocks to his belly to stop the hunger pangs. He lived in a mud hut with a family of 7. He described sharing rice and maybe an egg. That was the type of sustenance that they lived on. He grew up in abject poverty and in abuse. It was an abusive home. He made his way out of that village eventually to the Imperial College of London, earning his PhD with 7 dissertations. And when he did all of this and accomplished so much, he wore a lot of masks. He's the American dream. Rabia Fatima Khan, she was born in UP, which is the northern part of India, in 1947, the year of the partition. And that is when her family had to leave India. The entire country erupted into civil war. The British, who had colonized India for, I think, over 200 years, they were leaving. And when they left without a government. And so my mother's family, they had enough resources to pay, human traffickers who were using old abandoned ships, military ships, put their family in the basement of a military ship, and they traveled around the western part of India until they arrived in Pakistan. So imagine that was where my mother began her life as an infant. My parents immigrated to Los Angeles, where my dad got his first job. I was the middle child. My brother was a year and a half older than me. I look back at those pictures of my mother and father, and I still see like hope in their hearts. And I still see this kind of innocence. And I don't know, I love looking at those pictures because it's that little hope that I still see that I was grasping on for dear life as a little girl, as a baby, as an infant in a call room where my mom's nursing me. I still, despite all of her pain and angst and confusion and being in this foreign world, struggling to figure out how to, she's training to become a psychiatrist. She's married to a man with no empathy, no just mercy in his heart. The truth is that the amount of rage that he lived with and lived in his body, there was just no amount of hitting, yelling, intimidating, and bullying that he could do to all of us and my mother that could fully express all that lived in him. And as a young girl, I didn't just see him in his rage, but I saw the demons that possessed him. And I was terrified. I was terrified of my father. it would express itself as my dad just ready to snap. One misstep, one wrong answer, and his hand would come at you, a fist would come at you. But more than anything, when I really think about what I was scared of most, it was his eyes. They were so beady. It's like it wasn't him. And now looking back, I know I truly feel like he was possessed by a lot. And I saw him in all of his rage, and I saw the demons that possessed him. And even in that, even through all of that, I still had compassion for him. You know, as I think about just even that scene, walking and sitting down and just kind of, we had a chalkboard on the floor, and dad would be sitting on the right and I'm sitting on the left, and I'm just hunched down because I knew that there was no right answer that I could give him. Every equation, I couldn't think clearly because I was so afraid of him hitting me. Invariably, he would just throw a chalk. He would just throw chalk at me, but chalk seems like a light little object, but the rage and the velocity and the momentum of the chalk when it would hit me, it would render me just silent and helpless, and I would just sit there. I couldn't respond. I couldn't cry. I just had to take whatever it was that he needed to express. And he would, of course, this all is accompanied with, "You're a stupid bum." He spoke in our language, Urdu, and in English, but, I can still remember like the rage of like, "You are zero unda." That means like you're a zero in life. You're a nobody. Like the way he would just throw his hand out and be like, "Zero unda." And just the anger and the rage. He was terrifying. I wasn't just scared of him. I was more scared of like how he hurt my mother, and just wanting to protect my mother. I felt all of her sadness and her angst. She would vacillate between afraid and diminished and just almost like catatonic. Just someone that doesn't have their soul present, almost like she is now with her Alzheimer's. But then she would go into just fury, just rage, and she would scream and yell at us, at him, and it was just, our home was chaos. It was disorder. My mother was terrified that my skin was black. She used to call me Kali, and Kali means black, and she was very fair-skinned. She grew up in Pakistan, arranged very young to be married, and she grew up in a culture that she needed to marry me young and be relieved of her burden, and so she would call me Kali. That was like what she referred to me as. My skin was so dark. She was like, "How am I ever going to, in Urdu, how am I ever going to find you a husband? Who's ever going to marry you?" And that was her obsession. She raised me terrified of men, of people, of the world. So I was afraid to put my feet in the grass in the front door. I was afraid to open the screen door and go outside. But I was also afraid of being inside. And it was a really chaotic and disorderly world. I could still feel hope in her. I remember my mother. I remember her sorrow. Like, she has Alzheimer's now, so she doesn't stop smiling and everything's joyful to her, But as a little girl, I think I held all her pain. And I'm okay with that. Her forehead on a prayer mat, just in a state of just the tears, the sniffling, the crying. She was just gripping that maybe there is a God, and maybe he's just hearing her. I think she prayed a lot for us. I think she was very compassionate. She always prayed for my dad. But I think mostly she prayed for acceptance that whatever hardship was in our lives, that she just have peace about it. And she carried that peace. And it was with that peace that she was able to help so many clients as patients, as a psychiatrist. They would clamor into her office, like, because she had love to give. And it was big love. And she helped so many people. And I would be scared. I would help her in her clinic. And I mean, these are like 400-pound men sometimes that, like, could go into a rage. Or I would go with her to the acute unit at the psychiatric hospital when she had to admit a new patient. And these are people sometimes that were naked and chained to beds. But she just had this peace and trust. She was never scared of these people that the whole world had just shunned. These people trusted her. And I knew that there was that part of her that lived, and I connected with that part. And my dad, because I connected with that, not only was she crazy, but by proxy, I was crazy too. And that was the story in my family, that Mom and Rabia are crazy. Oh, if only we knew how to express that these are in fact gifts, and that we actually had enough love to shine it on every member of the family. If they would just stop demonizing us and abusing us. But here we are. Here we are. And she's at peace. Her Alzheimer's has given her total relief from the things that she no longer wants to think about or remember. She doesn't remember them. She just smiles at everybody. I was a master of creating organization out of chaos. I was raised in a very, very strict Muslim home. My parents clung to their faith because that's really all that was the only known in America. Like, they didn't know what else to hold on to. They were afraid of the West and people's other values. And Dad needed to maintain strict control. Mom needed to get me married. I mean, they clung to religion in a very extreme way. So that was my life. And when I say extreme, I mean every movement was dictated by a religious injunction. I knew the prayer for stepping with my right foot into the room. I knew the prayer for, doing the ablution 5 times a day. I knew the prayer for if I had a dirty thought, how to cleanse myself and do a ritual. There was so much. It was like an OCD level of practice in our home. And I always felt unworthy. I always felt confused. I never felt it. There was never enough that I could do to be in God's favor. But I found my solace in school. I found, like, teachers that consistently smiled when I didn't get math. Miss Geiger, when I didn't answer math problems correctly, she never called me a name. I think school is where I found my solace. Everything, we stood in lines. Things were predictable. There was a window. It was a fairly small room. I had a twin bed. There was brown carpet. And then there was a white shelf. And I actually feel relief. That white shelf had everything on there that I needed. It had books. It had the stories of the prophets. It had the story of these, I had my books, like, so neatly stacked. And I mean, if anybody came in that room and they touched anything on that shelf, when I tell you, I would go into a rage, because on that shelf that was me. That was everywhere. And I had a spirograph. I had those, I think they're gel pens. I had very few art supplies, but there was more white on the shelf than there was anything else. It wasn't like it was full of things, but the things it had on there, it was where I could open a book and I could just go into a world and I could be these characters and I could feel everything that they were feeling. It was like my place to feel everything. And I would wait. I would just, when I'd get home, that's where I wanted to be, is my white shelf. And I wanted to keep it so perfect. And I remember my sister, 'cause she was young, and like she would sometimes, like there would be crayons and all kinds of, art supplies, basic ones like matte pencils that I'd bring home from school. It was, but if she moved them, I would just feel like I couldn't breathe and I would just be in a rage. But it helped. It gave me just joy. It gave me that place to express joy. And there were other places like that, school, the teachers, especially my teachers. I always felt like a freak. I know that I didn't feel comfortable in my body, so there was no way for other children to, but I felt like an alien. But feeling like an alien and not feeling connected feels better than what it feels like to be at home. And it was relief. So I loved being at school. I loved being at school. To this day, I don't want to stop being in school till, how it feels when I walk into a classroom and there's a gift, there's a professor that sees this untapped potential in you. And all you have to do is show up and just do some work and you receive gifts. Like I can't think of any other, Little Rabia, you are so brave. And you're still just on the brink of your greatness. And all of that deep empathy and the deepest, darkest fear that you felt and the love that you still accessed in those horrific moments, always somehow finding the light, looking for where you could attune your heart to feel love in those moments that you loved your broken mother, or when your little sister came into the world and you just shone all that love onto her. You kept yourself alive. And now look at your heart. Not only has it grown in like capacity, but it has grown aurically in how much light it can shed on other people. Look how powerful. Look at your heart. It was your superpower. And look at you've come into it, and it's still expanding with every experience. With every, just every new project, every new creative endeavor, every new connection, every new relationship, with every new person that comes your way, your heart is just expanding and expanding. Wasn't it all worth it? Don't despair. Those tears and it was just a minor blip in this beautiful life. My mom always had this special, there was something about my mother where I could feel, I get chills talking about it. The same energy that lives in me, it was still alive in her. My dad couldn't kill it. All the difficulties of being an immigrant and, growing a psychiatric practice and all, abuse at home, no support, trying to raise kids, trying to make sense of this life. She still had this spirit that lived in her. And those are the fond memories like I have of, she would sing the songs of Rabia al-Basri. I didn't even know until I entered my 30s that that's what she was singing. And this was the same energy that I was channeling. I didn't know But she had this fire in her. She had this fight in her. And she just wouldn't go down. She wouldn't take hits without like coming back. And I have that. And we have that. And and even now, with her advanced Alzheimer's, she still handles herself with grace, and she still has that in her. I think she would say, "You're a pioneer. You broke the curse. You found a way out. You are living in freedom and the liberation that I couldn't even taste. Take it and go do so much good with it." And she would say, "Remember when I would tell you that all suffering is eventually relieved? This is your relief. Go live it. Go live in joy." Like, that's what she would say. That's what she would say if she knew I was her daughter and I was living the life I was living. She would say that. Demons are a dark black energy. It's almost like, and I'm with my hand showing you energetically kind of the velocity, like the movement, like the density of their energy. And it would be around, and I'm specifically remembering when my father was raging coming down the stairs, and I was cowering at the bottom of the stairs, and he had asked me, "Where are the scissors?" He had yelled it from the top of the stairs from across the house, and I just knew. I went ahead and balled up because I knew I didn't know where the scissors were. So I just waited, and when I looked up at him, I could see beyond him. I could see these dark, dense energies, and when I tell you, and there was like 2 of them around either side of him, and it's almost like he was moving, they were moving through him. And that terror that and I'm trying to connect with it, but it's so hard sometimes because I was so disassociated. That terror, the next scene that I remember is, just laying in my urine in the bed, like night after night, just laying on a plastic carpet runner that would catch the urine because I just had no control over my bladder. I knew that the things that I was seeing, that they were real. I knew that they were real. I didn't have anybody to tell. I was so terrified of not just my dad, but the demons that possessed him. I've seen them around my mother, and I didn't know what to do. I just didn't know what to do. And I spent a lot of nights in the dark in my room, in my urine, like just being so terrified of the things that I was seeing. And now I know what they were. Now I know what they were. I didn't know that I could see things. I didn't know that I had an ability to see things that other people weren't seeing. Because now I recognize it's one of my gifts, and I run in circles of other people that see the things that I see, and they're able to see my gifts, and I'm not crazy. And on top of everything that I was seeing, I was sure that I was crazy, because my dad would repeat over and over to me that my mother was crazy. And I was so unsteady because I thought he was crazy. And I didn't understand, and his whole story to the whole family is that mom is mentally ill. He would tell that to all his brothers and sisters. He would reach out to her family. I'll never know the truth. I'll never know if his abuse and his mistreatment of her is what made her crazy, after she'd already had this crazy making childhood, being exposed to the partition and this and being a refugee. And, I don't know. Sometimes I think it's my dad and his rage and absolute inability to have any empathy. It wasn't in his heart. And I think that made my mom crazy. And I knew as a little girl, something was really wrong. I didn't know who to talk to. I just didn't have any resources. I eventually went on to become a therapist to try to make sense of this crazy world, because all I ever wanted to do was to see good in somebody. If I could just see a little good in my dad, life was going to be okay. If I could just see the good in my mom, life was going to be okay. And I just needed to hold on to that, But it was terrifying. I'm no longer terrified. I walk in graveyards now. I conjure the dead. I speak to the dead. They're not scary. They have messages. And they had really big messages for me. But I didn't know how to receive them at that age, because I still had a lot to go through before I was ready. I didn't know that my story was meant to be told. I didn't know that there were going to be people that wanted to hear it. I didn't even know that it had any importance. But now I know the power of my voice. And I know that I will speak every time I'm asked, and I'm meant to, from the heart, without censoring myself, without covering up for people, without lying to myself or to others anymore. I always felt like a misfit. In episode 2, you'll hear how that misfit feeling drove me to take my first real steps away from the only world I had ever known. This episode was produced by Megan Broccoli, audio engineering and sound design by Trevor Rockwood. Kyle Leal is our cinematographer. Nathan Moody is our digital media specialist. I'm Rabia Khan, your host and creator of Channeling the Voice of Possibility. Thank you for journeying with me. I hope it stirred your heart and reminded you to always speak your truth. If you are a fellow seeker, make sure to subscribe so you never miss out on upcoming adventures. Until next time, raise your voice, raise your vibe, and join the cosmic tribe.